Just like Thursday, the boat in trouble. This time, Elmora was able to wriggle off the hook with 1:30 to go, and now they hold a favored position.
We're not going to have it. Take more to each.
The game here is to get up to full speed. Kayard makes his move first, and he'll be going faster when the gun goes off.
Go down below the line. 20. 17. 14. 13. 4, 3, 2, 1, gun.
Another clean start and another good job by Dellenbaugh.
Hi, everybody. I was doing some thinking, and seems like I should pay some homage to the woman who inspired Trans Day of Remembrance, and maybe go through a really good telling of her story that was on NBC a while ago. Rita Hester was killed in 1998. She was from Hartford, Connecticut, but spent most of her life in Boston. And let's just get right into it. She was killed in 1998, which was the year that I started transition. Her death inspired my friend Gwen Smith to push to recognize the threat. Well, first of all, to remember a life, but to get people to recognize the threat that transphobia poses in the world. So let's just I'm gonna put myself off to the side and just read, and I hope you'll read along. The brutal death of Rita Hester in 1998 inspired a movement. But while her legacy is cemented, her name has been largely forgotten. And yes, I think this is important to mention. If anybody's uncomfortable with the descriptions of a trans life and violence, you might want to go do something else for the next few minutes. Editors note this story contains graphic descriptions of violence and misgendering against a transgender person. Rita Hester fought like hell. The story was written in blood. The phone had been ripped from the wall. Half a shoe print, not Rita's, marked the bloody floor. The locks on the front and back doors had been left intact, leading neighbors and police to believe her killer had been invited in. Police don't clean crime scenes. Families can hire specialized crime scene cleaners, but Hester's family didn't have the thousands of dollars that would cost. They walked into her first floor apartment to find blood all over the walls and the floor. Hester had been stabbed 20 times. Hester's siblings and her best friend, Brenda Wayne, cleaned the apartment themselves, trying to spare Hester's mother, Carolyn Hester, the sight. Mother was in the apartment as we were cleaning when recalled. Her mother found a bloody sandal. The Hesters have been forced to relive these details for more than 20 years because by some stroke of fate, Rita Hester's death spurred the international movement Transgender Day of Remembrance every November since her death in 1998. Reporters have called Hester's mother and sister Diana Hester to rehash the details and get updates on the case. And still, and this article came out in 2020, and still, Hester's murder has never been solved. The Transgender Day of Remembrance, an annual vigil for transgender homicide victims, has been instrumental in humanizing transgender people in the eyes of the media, the police, and the wider public. For many in the trans community, the day is the only annual gathering they have. And still, most transgender people can't tell you who Rita Hester was. Transgender history is rarely taught in schools, and trans issues remain largely underreported. 2 decades after Hester's death, the U.S. is facing what advocates call an epidemic of anti-trans violence. I'll put a link in the chat to this story, but you can probably find it. This year, which was 2020, interestingly, is on pace to be the deadliest for trans people since advocacy organizations like the Human Rights Campaign started tracking transgender homicides in 2013. Last year, the campaign tracked 27 transgender deaths due to violence. Just over halfway through the year, 2020 has already had 21 violent transgender deaths, according to the campaign. I'll pause for a second here and take a quick peek. At what's happening this year. I think we can look here. 321 trans and gender diverse people were killed this year between October 1st, 2022 and September 30th, 2023. This is worldwide. Yeah. And as you can see, Brazil and Mexico are ahead of the United States in their violence against trans people. murderous violence against trans people. Anyway, back to the story. Last year, the campaign tracked 27 transgender deaths due to violence just over halfway through the year. I think I read that. Black trans women, like Hester, still make up the overwhelming number of victims. Like Hester, their lives are often distilled into headlines and then lost. Hester was killed on November 28th, 1998 in Boston. Little has been reported on her life. Her mother, now 82 and ailing. I wonder if Kathleen is still alive. Faces the prospect of dying without ever knowing why her daughter was targeted, other than the frustratingly obvious: she was trans and black and beautiful. Everybody knew Rita, and you know what? Everybody did, apparently. I mean, I didn't. I wasn't living in Boston at the time, but Boston is my hometown. A number of these places that are referred to in the story are familiar to me. I'm 10 years older, remarkably, to the day. Hester was born November 30th, 1963. I was born November 30th, 1953. I'm one of the fortunate people that manages to have two birthdays. My rebirth day was November 12th, 2002. When, thanks to the good offices of a physician in Neenah, Wisconsin, I finally emerged as a person with the physicality that I had longed to possess my entire life. Anyway, so I've had a couple legal drinks since then as a 21-year-old. Anyway, Hester was born November 30th, 1963. She grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, one of 5 kids. There was never a time in her life when Hester wasn't Rita, according to her younger sister, Diana. As far as Diana can recall, her big sister didn't have a particularly coming out moment. My entire family, even my nieces and nephew, everybody knew Rita. It was very receptive. There was no issue, whatever. It was fine. Esther's mom, Kathleen, and some other relatives, pardon me, still often use masculine pronouns and a male birth name when talking about Hester, as if even 22 years later, that part of their minds hadn't transitioned. It's hard to conclude that this is an outright denial of Hester's womanhood. After Hester's murder, her mother campaigned for justice alongside her daughter's transgender friends. Kathleen Hester is quoted in news articles during that time using the name Rita to refer to her child. If anything, the old name and pronouns feel like a byproduct of a family cut off from their transgender loved one in the 90s, before pronouns became a barometer of respect for trans life. It's unclear what boundaries Hester set for her family before her death. Hester didn't find as loving a welcome in the larger Hartford community, according to her sister. In Hartford, people got assaulted and hurt and all the other stuff. But Rita had friends initially in Boston and started going to Boston. Diana Hester said, in her early 20s, Rita made the move permanent. In Boston, she could also make her gender transition permanent. Hester found a community in unlikely places for a black trans woman in the 90s in Boston, according to friends. She was deeply embedded in the city's rock scene and hung out in her neighborhood's straight bars. Hester lived big, lived large, and loved big. Friends said she frequently traveled to Greece for vacation and kept a cat and a boa constrictor as pets. She left her house in disarray. She and her friend Brenda Wynn were always making a racket in Hester's first floor apartment on Parkvale Avenue in Boston's Allston neighborhood, Wynn said. The two were constantly laughing and gossiping and cooking. I ordered a large pizza and I came out and she ate the whole pizza on me, Wynn recalled laughing. And then we went out to eat and she wouldn't let me try one oyster, but yeah, she would eat you out of house and home. Hester spent a good deal of time at Jacques, a gay bar known for its drag shows. Remember that place? Johnny Frida, who has tended bar there since 1973, remembers her well. She was a happy person, Frida said. She would get up and dance. She was out for good times. Most of us are, kind of. But friends at Jack's worried that their beautiful, undaunted friend might wind up in trouble. Melinda Wilson, a fixture of Boston's trans community, said Rita's habits made her nervous. Our life is difficult. It really is. Wilson said of being a black trans woman in Boston, our lifestyle is dangerous, to tell you the truth. Kind of just being. She wondered whether Hester was too casual about the freedoms the city offered. Rita had a magnetic presence, friends said. It was hard to imagine anyone disliking her, and her natural beauty granted her some privileges that many trans people just didn't have. I kept telling her, I said, baby, just because you're the way you are, don't be thinking you can't go up into these straight clubs thinking you can just pick up anybody, Wilson said. Hester did find close friends in straight clubs. She met Wynn on one of Wynn's first bartending shifts in 1990 at Bun Ratty's in Allston. Back then, Bun Ratty's was a haven for artists and rockers. Yeah, it was. Even earlier, it was. Like back in the 70s. The exact type of place where Hester would hang out. The bar was also a 3-minute walk from Hester's apartment. When Hester walked into Bun Ratty's the day she and Wynn met, some of the regulars started snickering. I'd go down and I'd give them attitude and give her a welcome and ask what she wanted. And of course, she ordered a mudslide, Wynn said, laughing. It was a few months before the two ran into each other again. After that, Wynn said they were practically inseparable. Wynn is white and cisgender. She has bright red hair. Rita was her first transgender friend, but that didn't matter, Wynn said. You meet your best friend in life, and as soon as you meet them, it's like you've known them your whole life. And you just hang out, she said. It was very normal and comfortable that we had that, like, right away. It was nice. For those of you who just arrived, I'm talking about Rita Hester, the woman in whose memory, Transgender Day of Remembrance she was the inspiration for it. I should put this link into the chat, shouldn't I? Yeah, I should. I don't even know if this is fair use, but I think it should be. It's beautifully written. The two were so close that Hester spent Thanksgiving with Gwen and her family on November 26, 1998. It was the first time that Hester hadn't gone home for Thanksgiving and the last time she would celebrate the holiday. AKA, good to see you. November 28th. Local police called Kathleen Hester, that's her mom, at her home in Manchester, Connecticut, just actually where a relative of mine lives. Late on the evening of November 28th, 1998, Manchester's like 20 miles north of Hartford. Two days before Rita Hester's 35th birthday. Yeah. They told her that the Boston Police Department had called with some bad news. Diane Hester said she, I think referring to Kathleen, was alone at the time, and basically they just called and told her that her son, cops do, was murdered. Nobody came to the home or anything. Diana Hester had come back from a concert. It was well past 10 p.m., and her son, Taufik, then 7, was already asleep. She was standing in the bathroom when her husband told her that her mom was on the phone. I just heard her screaming, and I really couldn't make out what she was saying. She rushed to her mother's house, 15 minutes up the road, to console her. At Wynn's apartment in Alston, the TV flickered as she slept. Hester had been due hours earlier to watch figure skating competitions, but she never showed. The two had spent that Saturday morning playing racquetball. Hester left Wynn's house around noon. At 4 p.m., Hester called a friend, another trans woman who lived in Alston. Hester told a friend, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because she feared for her life since Hester was killed, that she was headed to the Silhouette Lounge, a dive bar just around the corner from her apartment. The friend took a nap before heading over to meet Hester shortly after 7 p.m. I walked to the Silhouette, and I see her street was blocked with cops, and I'm like, what happened? I have this bad feeling, the friend recalled. When Hester didn't return to Wynn's apartment that night, she assumed Hester had met a guy at Silhouette and just forgot to call her to cancel. That happens sometimes, according to Wynn, who said she went to bed without giving it a second thought. When Hester didn't return to Wynn's apartment that night, she assumed Hester had met a guy at Silhouette, just forgot to call her to cancel. Yeah, let's get back. Officers responded to a call about a fight at Rita's address at 6:12 p.m. on November 28th and was dispatched 7 minutes later, according to a Boston Police Department report. When they found Hester, she was still alive on the floor. She had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest. More than an hour passed between the time police were dispatched and an ambulance took her to Beth Israel Hospital, which ain't too far away, by the way. Beth Israel and Alston are, let's see, you got to kind of, never mind. Any of you from Boston can figure out the geography. But Beth Israel is definitely the closest hospital to where that was at. A next-door neighbor would later tell the Hesters that she called police. They took a long time to enter the apartment when the back door was open, Diana Hester told the neighbor. That said, the neighbor told her. The police listed Rita Hester as a male by the name of John Doe. Makings of a movement. Hey, Mark. Hey, KA. Hey, Dank Slug. Thanks for being here. In October 1998, I remember this one well, and I remember just weeks before Hester was killed, I wouldn't put it this way. I wouldn't put it the way NBC does here. Another anti-LGBTQ murderer, I would say. Another murderous crime directed at a queer person. Rock the nation. A gay white college student, Matthew Shepard, was fatally beaten and tortured in Laramie, Wyoming. The heinousness of Shepard's murder catalyzed a mainstream movement against homophobic violence. Still, for many transgender people in Massachusetts, my home state, such crimes were all too familiar. In November 1995, Chanel Pickett, a black trans woman, was strangled to death in Watertown, where I lived from birth to 7 years old. 10 miles west of Boston. The same year, Deborah Forte was stabbed to death in Haverhill, which sits on the New Hampshire border. And in September 1998, just 2 months before Hester's death, Monique Thomas, another black trans woman, was killed in Dorchester. The story says just south of Boston, but Dorchester is part of the city of Boston, as is Alston. It's a district. It's like they used to be independent towns, but they're now all part of the city of Boston. Fortes and Thomas's killers were convicted of murder. According to Nancy Nangaroni, a transgender activist who carefully documented Hester's death at the time, Hester had once remarked to a local paper in Newsweekly that she hoped Pickett's killer, William Palmer, would face justice. I'm afraid of what will happen if he gets off lightly, Hester told the paper. It'll just give people a message that it's okay to do this. This is a message we cannot afford to send. In 1997, Palmer's attorney used the trans panic defense, which I'm glad to say is no longer a legitimate defense in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, nor is it a legitimate defense in the great state of Maine. But this is where this began. It's like, God damn it, people. And Palmer was acquitted of murder. The lawyers argued that Palmer's homicidal reaction was justified because he discovered during sex that Pickett was transgender. Palmer who strangled a woman to death. Was convicted of assault and battery and served 2 years. Three years and 8 days after Pickett's murder, Hester was slain. On October 3rd, Bay Windows, an LGBTQ newspaper in Boston, reported that a transgender man had been killed in the city. The story, mind you, this is an LGBTQ newspaper. The story misgendered Hester throughout and put her first name in quotes like it was a nickname. Mainstream newspapers like the Boston Herald and the Boston Globe, the latter, the Herald's the conservative newspaper, the Globe's the liberal newspaper in Boston, in case y'all don't know. Both in quotes. I could go into Boston stuff deep, but I ain't gonna. Mainstream newspapers like the Boston Herald and the Boston Globe, the latter, the Globe, referring to Hester in 1998 as a man who sported long braids and preferred women's clothes. I gotta go up here. I hope I don't lose my place, but I gotta go up here. Really? Really? And preferred women's clothes had long been misgendering trans people, but that LGBTQ media had actively refused to correct their coverage proved to be the breaking point, said Gunnar Scott, former executive director of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Action Coalition. The worst part was the gay community, in contrast to how Matthew Shepard was kind of uplifted. And remember, these two things happened pretty close by time-wise. And that has continued to this day. Another Bay Windows article from December 10th, 1998, referred to Hester as a slain Alston man and used her former name even after Kathleen Hester, her mom, was quoted in the article using the name Rita. It's pretty shocking to me that the media would dead name Hester, would dead name Rita, and while her family would not. Often it's, well, perhaps it's a sign of progress that that's not the case now. Not so much anyway. Subsequent articles in Bay Windows detail the discontent of transgender people over the paper's coverage while continuing to misgender Hester. Jeff Epperly, the paper's editor at the time, refused to change course. Oh my God, this is pretty bad. Quote, I had the lofty goal of defending journalistic independence, unquote, Epperly said recently. Recently? This is like in 2020. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? Mr. Epperly, you'd had 22 years to think on this, and that's the best you could do? Said recently of his thinking at the time, Rita may have been killed because she was a man who lived as a woman. Therefore, I insisted that her status as what I saw as a man living as a woman was germane to the story. Note the I saw part bit in that. Epperly said he stuck at the time to the Associated Press style book, a widely used guide followed by newspapers around the country. Now, bear in mind, this guy is the publisher of a fucking LGBTQ publication, but we're going to stick with the AP style guide in 1998. Journalistic independence. What I saw as a man living as a woman, being germane to the story. Dude. And this he's saying in an interview in 2020 with NBC News after having 22 years to think about it. When I talk about what you do is what matters as opposed to the bullshit you spout, this is what I'm talking about. Which then recommended that reporters use only a trans person's new name and pronouns if they had undergone gender confirmation surgery. Because he wanted the paper to hold up against mainstream outlets and win awards, he now calls the decision indefensible. Perhaps he has had a bit of a revelation that maybe eyeballs on screens and asses in seats isn't worth it. Days after Hester's death, 50 transgender people and allies marched from the Boston Herald headquarters to Bay Windows offices to protest. By the time they got to their destination, everyone had gone home except for a young sales associate named Sue O'Connell. I felt it was important that they were going to protest that they actually see someone from the paper there, said O'Connell, brave person, who has since become Bay Windows co-publisher. It was a large crowd and they were very, very angry. That same year, inspired by Hester's murder, Gwendolyn Ann Smith created a web project called Remembering Our Dead to honor transgender homicide victims. Gwen Smith is a friend of mine. Never met her, but we had the same surgeon. We've been talking on the application formerly known as Twitter since probably 2000, since the frickin' thing started. The following year, she founded the Transgender Day of Remembrance and planned marches to honor the victims in Boston and San Francisco. When the Transgender Day of Remembrance first began, trans people were nameless victims in many cases, Smith wrote in 2014 in The Advocate. Our killers would do their best to erase our existence from the world, and law enforcement, the media, and others would continue the job. Leading the charge against the media's misgendering trans people at that time was transgender activist Nancy Nangaroni, who scaled down her hours as an electrical engineer to advocate for justice for trans homicide victims on her website and radio program Gender Talk. In 2000, to mark the second anniversary of Hester's death, Nangaroni interviewed Kathleen and Diana Hester on Gender Talk. Kathleen Hester sounds like she's crying throughout. During the interview, Kathleen Hester recalled when she was very ill after having been diagnosed with diabetes, and Rita held her and told her she needed to get better. Ma, please take your medicine and take care of yourself, because I want you to be here a long time with me, Rita Hester said, according to her mother. At one point, Nangaroni asked whether there was anything the trans community could do for the Hesters, and Kathleen Hester encouraged listeners to donate to increase the $5,000 reward being offered for information leading to an arrest in her daughter's murder. Since this has happened, the police don't seem to be doing anything at all, Kathleen Hester said in the interview. She gave out her phone number and urged anyone with information on her daughter's killing to call her. Diana Hester said at the time, basically what the Boston Police Department stated is this is a cold case now. They're not really diligently working on it at this point. A legacy cemented, a name lost. Not much changes in places like the Satellite Bar and Lounge in Austin. I know that's the truth. That is the absolute truth. I haven't been there in ages, but popcorn from the machine is always free. The photos stuck up to the walls to reflect a kind of familial commitment from customers. It's the Cheers of Alston. I remember the Satellite Bar. It's kind of been the same forever and ever. I don't remember from 1998, but it's been there. I know the place. And Alston's a funny place. This is the Cheers of Alston. The student crowd turns over. The regulars just age. A missing face goes unnoticed even 2 decades later. Rita Hester used to sit here. It's Friday night at the end of November, and the student crowd is monopolizing the pool tables. But if you ask, about every third person remembers Hester. Kate Noonan lifts her arm from the honey-colored bar. The name Rita has been scrawled on her right forearms in pink, and marker and pen faded by 3 days of wear. It took more than 20 years for Noonan to discover that her friend's death had inspired TDR. I looked it up online and it was just right there, she said. I was floored. Noonan wrote down Hester's name over and over, like it was at risk of being lost. Maybe it is. Her murder just around the corner from the satellite bar is decades in the past. This was the last place she was seen alive. And then, barely any more information. Neighbors told Diana Hester that they saw two white men leave Hester's building just after 6 o'clock on the night of her death. For years, Hester had a white, blonde boyfriend named Bobby. According to her friends and family, no one can seem to remember his last name. While Bobby was her main guy, Wynn said she had others, some sugar daddies, some just for fun. Wynn isn't sure what kind of arrangement Hester had with Bobby or whether the two were exclusive because Hester was very private about her dating life. Diana Hester said she had told police about Bobby. After Rita died, no one saw him again. Her boyfriend just disappeared, baby, Wilson said. But then again, he didn't seem to come out with her a lot to begin with. A few weeks before her death, Hester went on vacation in Greece. Right before she left, she punched someone in the face at the Model Cafe, another Alston bar she frequented, according to the friend from the neighborhood who spoke anonymously. There we go. Got it out. Wynn said she vaguely recalled the incident. If anything, it's the kind of thing Rita would do to protect one of her friends, possibly even Wynn, she said. The Alston friend relayed the incident to the police, too. Both the friend and Wynn have another suspicion. A man, or men, who couldn't face his attraction to a trans woman came home with Hester and killed her in a fit of shame. This article and a whole bunch of stuff, nobody knows. Night before her murder, Wynn and the friend said Hester had met two guys at the Silhouette Lounge. She was hanging out with some Brazilian guys supposedly. Wynn said, adding that the details were fuzzy because she wasn't there. She heard about the guys later from Rita's friends. The other guy was with Rita. The other friend was with Rita that night. She said the guys were Australian, one young, one old. She recalled seeing them at the Silhouette the night before Rita's death. I always got a bad feeling about those guys. I don't know why, she said. They looked like they would be carrying knives or something, and I mentioned it to the police. Questioned multiple times about Hester's murder via email and phone, the Boston Police Department didn't give a statement to NBC News on the case for 8 months. A request to see the initial police report of her death also took 8 months. Sergeant John Boyle, a police spokesman, declined to comment on the specifics about the case because the investigation is still active. We don't like the connotation of cold. We call it unsolved. Boyle said an unsolved homicide unit continues to work the case, but he wouldn't let NBC News interview any of the detectives. He couldn't say how many other cases in the unit was responsible for, but he added they don't give up on their cases, they work on them. Last year, WBOR Radio of Boston, WBOR is Boston University Radio, it's a PBS station, reported that the city was doubling the number of officers and criminologists assigned to unsolved murders by adding 7 people to the unit. At the time, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office reported that the city had 1,367 unsolved homicides. Kathleen Hester, now in her 80s, is in failing health. These days, it's hard for her to sit through an interview. She fears dying without knowing who killed her daughter. or why. There are constant reminders. Birthdays tick by without Hester, who would have turned 57 this year. This was 3 years ago. Like I said, I'm 10 years older. Same birthday. Fucking real. Diana Hester recently found some of her sister's clothing while cleaning a closet. Taufik Chowdhury, Diana's son, grew up visiting Hester in Boston. He's since come out as gay. Today, he travels from Connecticut to Boston and wonders what it was like for Hester to come out and find safety and community on the streets he now frequents. Chowdhury said coming out to his family was stressful, even though they ultimately embraced him. He wonders what it would have been like if Hester had still been alive to serve as a queer role model. It would have been a completely different lifestyle. I think I'd probably be living in Boston today, he said. You know, it would have been someone I could have looked up to. Now he goes to Transgender Day of Remembrance events to honor her. Diana Hester said that for the first several years, she called the Boston Police Department all the time for updates on the case. In 2006, it announced that it was reopening the case. She never heard much after that. And after a while, I just stopped calling. And that's the end of this NBC News story from oh golly, what is it? What's the dateline? July 16th, 2020. It's been 3 years since. Been 3 years since. Yeah. And it's Sunday, the 19th of November, tomorrow. November 20th is Transgender Day of Remembrance, and we're going to be thinking of the Brianna Gay. And I haven't done my Brianna Gay springs to mind. A 16-year-old kid beaten to death by her schoolmates because she was trans. I have to ask the people that that say with such authority that they can't know who they are. Their parents can't know who they are, say with such conviction that they know best, better than the medical community, better than families, better than children, better than the people that are involved. They know best. And they know so much to the best that they will advocate and laugh and make fun. I was recently asked by one such person, how many people have they killed? I would ask, how many people have they convinced not to kill? By saying that the person who was the victim of violence was irrational and deluded, and that her parents and caregivers should not have been allowed to afford that person a chance at a decent life. When you look at the numbers of trans people who are murdered, they're not huge. There aren't an awful lot of trans people in the world. For the most part, it's, you know, the numbers may be increasing because there has had been there's been a bit more tolerance and a bit more understanding towards trans people and trans lives. And so people who are trans feel more comfortable in thinking it'll be okay. But it's not a contagion. The fact that you see more trans people in the world is not a result of contagion. It's simply as a result of acceptance, greater acceptance, and the people that rail against that greater acceptance have other things in mind, because it's certainly not care for the people, as far as I can tell. I might be wrong. Perhaps these people who argue so strenuously with me, perhaps the people who think that it's fun to engage me and misgender me and, generally be assholes. Um, Perhaps they have, my well-being at heart. They want to lead me to Jesus. I can't believe that of the atheists that do the same, because ain't no Jesus in the mix there. Although the atheists that do the misgendering shit is fewer and further between. But it's not utterly missing in the mix. But especially on the eve of Transgender Day of Remembrance, I think people need to understand that or I would hope that people would understand that setting yourself in opposition to trans people and our existence and falling into mental traps about well, he was asking for it. Who did he think he was? Who did she think he was? And I'm trying to use pronouns because, believe it or not, there are trans men too who are victims too. But the focus is on trans women like me altogether too frequently. I can go into a whole long soliloquy about trans misogyny and patriarchal thinking and all of that stuff, but I'm not going to do it because I really want to honor tonight Rita Hester, a Black trans woman who died four days before her birthday. At the hands of people who couldn't take people unknown. We don't know why. We don't know why. Senseless violence, really. So when you run across somebody who says, "Who have I killed?" while they're sitting there saying 16-year-olds can't know who they are, did it really matter whether Brianna Gay knew who she was? Or did it matter that you are propagating the notion that she can't possibly know who she was as a person? She can't possibly know that. Which led some of her classmates to beat her to death because she wasn't what you think she should have been. That's what I have to say. Good night.